Good afternoon, this is Coach Wesley, Head of Spark Performance Lab and researcher at the University of Central Lancashire.
معكم ناصر عبد الله. اليوم راح نتكلم عن مختبر سبارك، وراح نعرف شنو في عندنا مختبر سبارك وشنو راح نستفيد ونطور بالمختبر نفسه. راح نسأل الكوتش ويسلي عن المختبر وشنو في عندنا بالمختبر وشلون راح اتطور انا كعضو في سبارك، وكوني لاعب جري هم شلون راح اتطور بالمختبر. شنو عندنا مختبر سبارك وشنو اقدر اسوي بالمختبر؟
So Spark Performance Lab is an initiative to introduce sciences into modern facilities, where a few years before we will just start with training someone. Now we have the ability to measure specific biomechanical and physiological parameters in order to have a distinct and tailored approach for our clients. Aside from that, there are various monitoring services that we can provide to ensure that what is done in the gym really matters and improves someone.
كوتش ويسلي، أبي أسألك عن الأجهزة اللي شفتها بالمختبر، وكل جهاز له اختباره والمسمى ماله. شلون أتطور كلاعب أو كعضو في سبارك؟
So we have two main services. We have our recovery services, which consist of our cryo chamber that cools down to a minus 140 degrees. This has proven to improve white blood cell production and can be key in a rehabilitation process of an athlete or even a general population. We also have an anti-gravity treadmill. The best analogy for it is running on the moon, where there's less gravity, so we can introduce running and train key biomechanical principles of running without having the physiological loading on every step. Aside from that, we have various performance services. The CosMat, which is our main device to measure maximum oxygen uptake, is one of them. That's more the metabolic side, interesting for runners and other endurance sports. We can also offer different strength assessment with our fault performance technologies, which include various jump tests. It can be balance tests for elderly population, very specific strength assessment for assessing key musculature, maybe in rehabilitation process or even in a performance context.
كوتش ويسلي، أبي أسألك منو ممكن يقدر يسوي الاختبار؟ هل شخص رياضي فقط أو ممكن شخص عادي؟ هل راح يستفيد منه بشكل عام ولا بس الرياضيين؟
Yeah, so with a performance lab, there's always the perspective that it is for athletes specifically, but that is not the case. I just spoke about the context of rehabilitation. That can be general population too. When you work with a patient or athlete or general population who has been injured, there needs to be a structured approach, and there need to be a certain benchmark that someone needs to reach before they can progress to the next stage. That is a perfect example of what we can deliver with our fault performance technologies. We can assess objectively when it's safe to progress to the next stage of rehab.
كوتش ويسلي، المختبر عندنا هل في مجالنا نطوره أكثر؟ هل مع الوقت راح ندخل أشياء جديدة في المختبر تفيدني أنا كرياضي أو كشخص عادي مشترك بالنادي؟
So first of all, we know that AI is becoming a common trend and something that most people can't almost go without anymore. We have introduced it as well. We have a new system called Trazabi, which can conduct various assessments, mobility assessments, explosive power assessment, etc. And based on those results, by AI generation, it proposes specific exercises and needs to the person who's being tested. That's one. Secondly, what we see when it comes to public health is that the measurements we conduct, will it be strength measurements, endurance measurements, or a CosMat device, those parameters are also related to general health. So in terms of the development is that the performance lab is not only for athletes, but it can also be key for someone who tries to screen if they're healthy or not, or maybe are predisposed to specific chronic diseases later on in life. And I think diabetes is a good example. So the latency period is 10 to 15 years, and we can see by various strength measurements and lifestyle habits if someone might be predisposed to develop it later on in life. And I think those are the two new trends for our Spark Performance Lab.
كوتش ويسلي، أول يوم لي بالنادي شنو تنصحني أسوي كاختبار في مختبر سبارك؟
So when we start with a new client, it's always key to build a strong foundation. Some of the pivotal tests that we recommend for new clients include an in-body test. With the in-body test, we get a good estimation about someone's body fat percentage, someone's skeletal muscle mass, and it provides us with a good guideline on how to approach a tailored approach with our clients. Aside from the in-body device, we want to assess some key movement patterns, like an overhead squat, to see if there are any deficiencies in mobility, maybe flexibility of key muscles, in order to establish that good foundation. Later on, we can focus more on performance parameters. But again, the key is building a strong foundation first.
كوتش ويسلي، بخصوص الإصابات، شلون نقدر نتجنب الإصابات؟ وهل في اختبارات معينة نقدر نسويها بالمختبر تفيدنا من ناحية الإصابات؟
Yeah, so when it comes to injuries, whether it be sport injuries or general injuries, we need to acknowledge that an injury is a multifactorial concept. So there are external factors, someone can slip and fall, but there are also intrinsic factors. And for the second, we can provide services. Sometimes an injury comes from low muscle strength. Well, we have all the equipment here in our Spark Performance Lab to measure muscle strength, and we can have a good indication of where someone is and where someone should be in order to maybe mitigate injury risk later on.
كوتش، أبي أسألك عن مختبرنا، مختبر سبارك. شنو اللي يفرق عن باقي المختبرات؟ شنو اللي يميزه؟
I think one thing that differentiates us is that we have a lot in-house. For instance, we have an anti-gravity treadmill for rehabilitation. That's something you won't see in many facilities. So that's one. We have various equipments with a specific purpose. Secondly, we have a very structured approach when it comes to our assessments. So before we assess someone, we have a pre-testing questionnaire, and we screen for potential variables that can affect the quality of our data. For instance, if someone has a bad night of sleep, we know that it can potentially affect their performance, and we consider all these variables when we interpret the data. Secondly, when we do collect the data, we do it in a structured approach. So we have scripts that we follow. Like for a jump test, it's 3, 2, 1, jump. And every coach in Spark utilizes the same structured plan when it comes to testing to make sure all data that we collect are of research grade. Lastly, after finishing the test with someone, we make sure we have a fully explanation of the results. We make sure it's understandable for people. We still have all the graphs and the complicated data, but we try to narrate it in our performance template so that you as a client, after your test, have some key recommendations that you can implement in your training or maybe in your nutrition. This is Coach Wesley.
معكم ناصر عبد الله في سبارك أنلكت.